Hello, everyone. This is the first episode of Weaponized Wisdom, a podcast about game design, shmups, and whatever comes together with this such a beloved topic. Today, I have the honor to have DrBossKey here with us, and he's the developer of Interstellar Sentinel, which is rolling here in background. And he will be also participating on the next events we're gonna do, the marathon, and by the way, the caravan championship we're gonna do will be with his game, so stay tuned.
Heck yeah,
yeah, and well, thank you so much for making some time to be here with us today, and as per my after this long introduction, I would like to say, what is this podcast exactly? What we want to talk here? First, we gonna talk, of course, about game design a little bit, because like people like saying like shmup is just like a game with spaceships where you shoot stuff and whatever, and we pretty much know that's not the true. Like, it's way more complex, way more complicated than that. And we're here to not just highlight, but to talk about and explain this complexity, to highlight and explain how deep, how complex, how dense is the shmup genre, and everything, every component, everything, every quirk, specifically how it comes together, how it changes a game completely and make what seems to be just another spaceship game where you shoot stuff and dodge bullets into something that it's completely different from one title to another. So, DrBossKey, first question I'd like to do to you this evening is, as a game designer, I understand that just like a musician or an artist, you have your inspirations, right? You have your sources from where you use as a reference, or I don't know. I believe at some point, someday, you came out with the idea. Okay, I want to do a shmup, and I want something from this guy and this guy and this guy. What would be like your references? What could you call references or inspirations or whatever?
Sure.
What shmups like caused you that itch to create your?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of an interesting one, right? So first of all, let me step back a little bit. Zorky, right? So Zorky, game master, game designer, game developer, a huge game enthusiast. I'm a big fan of pixel pilots, right? So also, just so people understand, like while we're talking and asking and answering questions, we both have enough gray hairs to really have a lot of formulated opinions, both in design, right? And also what we do, which is probably a good way to answer some of your questions, right? So I know back in the day, both of us nerded out about D&D. We both were game masters or dungeon masters. And a lot of what we had done from all those times past, right, is I used to roll my own game worlds. It was really fun. Like, I would sit down and create the NPCs and the dialogue trees and what they might say, and I'd have all these hooks for all of this. When you're playing really great D&D with people, you also get into the role playing aspect, and it's also mechanically dense, and so you start to craft and get deeply into the world from a rules perspective. But then you also are creating the content for how you want the players to engage, right? You're giving them enough breadcrumbs. Game design is very much in that aspect. And one of the things I love about D&D, of course, is that players, they have ultimate agency. Yes, you have your rules, but basically a player can say, I want to do this thing, and you as the game master never thought about that. And as a result, now your intention is, well, we can roll some dice. If it's a natural 20, shoot, let's just see if we can do it, right? If it's a normal 1, like, let's make it completely always a fail case and do something hilarious, right? Like, these opportunities to have the imagination and the camaraderie of your party coming together. So with that being said, D&D is one of my earliest forms. I think the first game console I owned was the Atari 2600. And then since then, I grew up when the Atari 2600 was new, by the way. So just to put that in perspective, right? The 8 and 16-bit era. So the very beginning of my shmup journey was I encountered a game, and back then, this was before you could rent video games, right? Just to put that, this was before Blockbuster Video, like video rental stores were a whole other thing, right? They were barely becoming a whole thing. And so very first game that
Can you just like try, I know it's pretty hard because it's something that we never took notes of this, but can you kind of roughly estimate the 1983, 4?
For Life Force, this is probably mid to late 80s. So
no, I mean
just what it was like
back in the days when you couldn't rent games, like because I have no idea because I'm not.
Well, yeah, because
we're in the US,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and things that were really popular in Europe were different than in the US at that point. So we had this like we had basically the arcade craze, right? We had what you'd call Pac-Man fever, right? Back then, all phones were plugged into the wall. We still had rotary phones where you have to look this up, but freaking culture was still very underground. This was like, where you could use tones to circumvent long distance phone calls and get phone calls for free. We had telephone booths that were prolifically everywhere, even mostly in the cities, but also in a lot of like suburban areas around like big box retail stores and things like that. And back then, we had the dawn of the internet, and I remember getting my first like 1200 baud modem, and there you had to take your phone plugged into the wall and you had to put it into your modem, and then you only had one phone line if you were poor. But back then, long distance phone calls were really expensive. Like, just imagine a world, no one pays long distance phone call charges anymore for anything, right? So everything was very metered. Like back then, like cable TV was pretty prolific, but you didn't have 1,000 channels, everything, right? And when I started gaming on CRT black and white bubble screen TVs, because just like it is in the modern day when we talk about what does it mean to be a child growing up now, like often people speak in the way of their iPhones and their Android phones, right? And these computers in your pockets, everyone's got multiple generations because every 4 to 8 years you wind up refreshing, right? And that means that little Timmy in the family gets, or your wife or however you decide to do it, every time you upgrade, there's a piece of hardware, maybe you trade it in, but there's a piece of hardware you generally, or a tablet, you're going to give to your children because you don't want them playing with your phone, right? So and back then that happened, but it happened with TVs. Like your family, if you were very lucky, they'd be like, oh, color TV. That was a thing in my life, right? Where I played a big chunk of video games without any color, right? And so we're talking about this would be technology from probably the early to mid to late 70s. I was born in 77, so I'm not crazy old. But that meant that by the time I was playing video games in the early to mid 80s, and I was super lucky that my mom was way ahead of her time. She had VHS tapes and she was into technology. It was considered not a thing that women should be spending time or energy in. And it was a very masculine, side of the culture. Nintendo back then, they only aggressively, marketed towards young male children, right? Like, and so if you wanted to be a woman in this time, you had to almost any time, but you had to fight for whatever you were interested in. And that also created these moments. I wouldn't be a game developer wasn't for the fact that my mom was really into and again, technology back then, that was counterculture. Nerds were counterculture back then, right? Like, and if you were into like even calculators and like home desktop computers and all of this, it was so foreign that there weren't any institutions for going to learn this stuff. It was always other types of vocations, right? Like electronics, you had some kind of technical engineering or some sort of computer engineering, but not really. So nothing much on the way of programming. And back then, some of your biggest innovations for the home computer markets were coming out of companies like IBM, right? So super interesting stuff. And you had, for me as a kid, I grew up one part suburban, and I grew up one part out in the country. And so whenever I'd go to the malls, there were always like 3 or 4 mom and pop, like locally owned computer shops. You go into these things, and there you'd be like, oh, here's the next generation of the modem. Like, ooh, now we can actually connect to other computers before they like on the internet, and we actually have better throughput rates, right? So here's the latest in PC Engine stuff, right? Like here's a lot of back then you had a lot of freeware games, right? Like in the Tim Sweeney's of the world, they distributed freeware. Like, so growing up at this time, it wasn't prolific. I personally didn't have any programmer friends, which changed a lot for me. And you are the kind of people you hang out with, right? So, but I was very much nerdy into gaming culture, right? So I had the Atari home computer. I had a Tandy at one point, and back then I also had to rake a lot of yards and hustle a lot because video games were still about $60. I know everyone's crazy now, right? So I had to do a lot to even be able to engage with games. And so I learned some of my craziest, like back then the Nintendo Power was brand new. Video games and Entertainment Weekly was still brand new. And these are these treasures where you would go into these stores, you'd find these magazines. And back then you couldn't find people very easily to be interested in these things. So I'd buy a magazine, I'd go home and these Video Games Entertainment, monthly, and I'd turn to each page and I'd look at all the stuff and like, oh, the Amiga computer. Wow, that does some of the best like side-scrolling shmups I've ever seen. I mean, those terms were back then, but I was like, ooh, that game was a game that I was playing because side-scrollers and platformers were they were brand new back then, right? And then you had on top of that, you had arcade machines that were starting to pop up in all of these different. They were in like almost every convenience store, every like gas station, 7-Eleven here. So I would rake all my yards and do all of my work, and I'd sometimes get an allowance, like my weekly allowance of like $5, and it was my greatest joy to get on my bike, and then a few of my buds, we would go down to 7-Eleven, we'd get a big gulp, we'd get a candy bar, and then we just drop quarters into arcade machines. Street Fighter 2, of course, if you were lucky, you could make your quarter stretch for quite a while as you got better, because you'd have people that would queue up, right, and put their quarter up, and so arcade culture was leading the charge on what games could be because their hardware cycles were faster, right? And so as we moved out of the Atari 2600 generation, and then we went to the 8 and 16-bit eras, it became this shift where you could see every few years that like we were pushing on every index, right? Hardware was such a big deal. Now you had 16 bits, and you had more of a color palette, and being able to grow up with that, it meant that if you were somewhat lucky, and I wasn't rich, but the other part of that is we had this network of people, right? So if you were friends with people back then, it was like, okay, my buddy Mike is my best friend on the planet, and his parents bought him the new NES, and they're a little bit richer than I am for sure, because I had to hustle for everything. But then they bought him some games, and the games that he'd have would be different than the games I'd have, and so you would trade the games amongst each other, just borrowing them, right? And then you'd also have sleepovers where we would play Street Fighter 2 with a few of our buds until the wee hours of the morning, and getting all of our fireball thumb calluses. And it was interesting. It was a magical time that brought us together in ways that games still do. But back then you had these forefronts of like, oh wow, I remember seeing the the first versions in arcade culture of like Killer Instinct and Tekken, right? Because we're starting to see it into 3D and polygonal at that point, Tekken 1 that is, with those arcade boards. And they were always setting that like kind of that standard until you got to around the PS1, PS2 generation. Basically, I mean, I think the arcade culture really started to fall behind PS2 generation because what you could get at home at that point was much better and superior to what you were getting in the arcade. And you still had the holdouts in the arcade, but the arcade wasn't the place where you would see some of the newest genres of games coming first. So it changed it a lot. That kind of paints a picture of kind of what that looked like for that time and age. And it was a very special time because me personally, everyone's got trauma. I grew up with trauma. I moved out into the world when I was 15. My son is 31 now. I'm 48. For a long time, because of the way the family was. And I've learned some of my best lessons from the people around me that that taught me how I didn't want to be in life. And I always had video games. I always had this escape. I had this place where I could just let the world go away. And because my mom was also really into video games, it created these moments where even to this day, some of my best coping mechanisms are to sit down and lose myself in a game, just like you would a great book or a movie. And back then, what people saw in their minds, what adults saw, right? They said, "Oh, this stuff goes bleep and bloop and bloing, bloing, bloing." And I don't even know what those, like Super Mario, he kind of looks like a character, but you had to use a lot of imagination because you had so few pixels, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that was the big thing is like every time you got a new game, it was like opening a new world and exploring, and being able to get lost in that was really a magical time. And now that doesn't exist in the same way because we live in a place of immediacy. Everyone can have anything they want whenever they want it, and it's always just on and there, right? It's on demand, and there was no, and that means that people have to choose if they want to engage deeper with something. So that also then means modern games sometimes, or especially in the free-to-play space, are using a lot of mechanisms to like treat your brain to get into an addictive state. I've always been addicted to games, but my addiction was more about it was a rite of passage to beat games. When you had to rake 50 yards to buy a $60 video game, and by the way, I learned some of my best lessons about advertising because it still happens to this day, right? You'd see in a magazine, you would see a full page spread for like, I don't know, Splunker or something where like it was like the game looked great and it was like, wow, it was all like animated and you're like, oh, this is beautiful. And then you get the game and you're like, it's basically pixel art trash. There's always been pixel art trash, right? So you also realized, and you were pissed back then, you couldn't trade in games. Like maybe someone else was interested and you could do a trade, because at the end of the day, if the games weren't good, they just weren't. And there were lots of games, like every generation, every hardware generation. There have been, a gross amount of games that are just not great, right? Lots of aspiration, and there's some real gems that got kind of left behind, but I learned a lot about growing up during this time. And so to answer your question, and then I'll be quiet, but back then, on the NES era, finding Mega Man, like Rockman, obviously Super Mario Brothers was huge, right? Played like anything that came from Nintendo, and it's kind of crazy that all these years later that they are still very much best in class in terms of making games, and they haven't really lost their way. It's incredible. And I've always been a big School of Nintendo fan in that respect, and so I've grown up with a lot of those sensibilities. Back when we were young, pretty much every game was hard. Every game was Souls-like, right? And they did that because, well, you had a lot of price. Nintendo fired up a Nintendo hotline, so people that really wanted to get better at the games or look to beat them, they would call these hotlines and pay money. It's like $1.50 a minute or something like that, or something crazy, right? And then they recognized the need of the marketplace. And for me, not having a lot of money, is working really hard for these games. It meant that I also had to deeply engage with them to get the most out of them. And hopefully they were good games. And so once I got burned a few times, you also start to learn, like, okay, oh, my buddy Mike's got this game. Oh, what's this game? Metroid. Oh, that game looks really interesting. This game, if I can't trade for it because someone doesn't have it, or they are interested in something else, okay, I buy this game because I know I can trade for them and then we can swap, right? So you really had to do this like a social hustle back then, right? And you had to be above board. You couldn't be the type of person that borrows a book and then is like, I'm moving to another state. See ya. There are always assholes like that as well. So, anyways,
to me,
I know, right? It's happened to all of us.
Someone took me about, I guess, 10, 20 cartridges back in the day, and I never saw them.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. I've lost quite a few things in very similar fashion. So in the 8-bit era, my very first shmup that I ever encountered was called Life Force. It was it's called Salamander in the UK, right? And first of all, there's so much weird and awesome Japanese weird stuff like shot into my brain because I learned about Japanese culture from games first, long before there was anime export, long before we had this mingling of Eastern Western culture, right? Elements like Ghost in the Shell and things like that. There were some things that really like U.S. culture and mainstream culture started to take more notice of. But so I remember playing Life Force, very Gradius, right? Gradius-ish in that case. And I was definitely hooked. Like I was like, oh wow, horizontal shmup, no surprise, is what I really enjoy. It gave me the sense that you were battling against like this alien, like these alien kind of crazy aspects, right? You had all this bio, like you had like bio horror to some degree. You were destroying like blood vessels, and you had the brain with the eye and the tentacles, and like my brain just as a young dude. I mean, I don't even think I was 12 at that point yet, right? Like I was like, ooh, this was good. And you could play it co-op, right? So that means you could play with your buds, and that became a thing. And I remember playing this game, and I played it till where I got good enough, because you had no choice back then, to eventually one credit clear this thing. And I didn't even know what one credit clears were. But I felt like the game had a lot to give, and as I was getting better at it, I just got deeper and deeper into it. Really enjoyed it, and that really left like the seeds for what I love about shmups. And I've played shmups my entire life. I'm not necessarily as deep and prolific as some people, as like super fans, but where I do engage, I've really just I've absorbed a lot of that. And maybe to answer the question a little bit further out, so the games I make are like love letters to games I played over the course of my life, right? So I've played every genre of game. I'm not huge into simulation. I like a lot more Mario in my like sports style games, but I've played them all, right? So, I'm a big fighting game head. I probably spent at least 20 or 30,000 hours across all fighting games at this point over the course of my life. I mean, and there are aspects in Interstellar Sentinel 1 where, you know, I built this this big screen, like it's not even a mini boss, just this big screen enemy. Because when you have horizontal shmups, you have a lot of space you need to fill, right? And in Gradius and games like that, they often will fill these spaces by creating geometry that you have to navigate through. And so it really focuses your gameplay into these moments to moments, right? Which is it's very challenging to think about that as well, from that perspective. And so I built this enemy, and he's like this giant treant, kind of like Lord of the Rings style, right? But he's all demonic, and he's got some crazy like burning eyes, and he's got this mouth full of like branchy teeth, and then he's got these giant like claw arms and smashy arms, right? And so you fly into this thing, and you see him, and he starts to swing in very slowly, trying to grab you and smash you. And I'm like, that is because when I was playing Mortal Kombat 2, played lots of fighting games, right? I mentioned Street Fighter as well. When I saw the living forest for the first time, and I saw the treants in the background, they would go woo, right? And it's all very low style, pixel. It was kind of like the rasterized, not really pixel art back then, right? It's like they took a lot of images of the actors and then did that. What was the technique for it? It was it's not pixel art, but it'll come back to me. But basically, that was their technique, where they would essentially take a bunch of images of humans doing the moves, and then they would basically put them into that style that became Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. But anyways, I saw this in the background for that, and that just lit up my brain. I mean, I loved the characters and the ninjas and the wackiness, and it was very gory, of course, which was a huge deal back then. Like Nintendo, when they put Mortal Kombat on their system, they were like, we're going to turn the blood to sweat. So they recolored everything so everyone was very sweaty, right? They censored a bunch of stuff.
It's the change that nobody asked for, right?
Yeah, right.
Nobody liked that.
And so my game and my inspirations are I mean, if I talk about just the shmup side of things, I like to describe my first game. It does a couple things. It scratches a few itches that I really hadn't ever experienced in a shmup. So a good example of that, right, is that we have what I'm now calling the ADHD weapon system. And this thing, you played the game. This thing has got 57 different weapons, right? And you're like, and it's not like R-Type where it's like, hey, you choose your ship and these are the 3 weapons you get. There you go. Like, have fun, play the rest of the game, right? What my expectation is you have your rapid shot, you have your power shot, which is like a big part of your gameplay. They're fixed weapon points, so there's some gameplay in that. And then you have an auto shot that happens regardless of which weapon set you use. And so what I never really experienced is a huge array of weapons that change your playstyle. I've experienced it before in shmups, right? But I hadn't experienced it where in the core game loop where it's like, hey, like you can stay on your weapon if you want, because that's the kind of player I used to always be, stick on a weapon set, but I want to like scratch a few itches that pushed me out of my own comfort zone. So it's a lot to ask players to learn, but I've tuned to balance the game to really accommodate for that, because as you're playing and you're playing at the highest level, as long as you don't die, like, you have these mechanisms where you're switching through weapons. And if you do die, then you're going backwards weapon sets, so it changes also the gameplay with which weapons you have at that point. So, so I also often describe Interstellar Sentinel as it's like Einhander, fantastic game, and Death Smiles had a baby delivered by Dr. R-Type. And then I realized that most people on this planet have no idea what I just said. You know, that's pretty okay too.
For me, it makes total sense. Yeah. One question you mentioned something that for me makes a lot of sense. You said that back in the day we used to play games in a different way we play nowadays. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago when I went to Brazil, and we talked about how different is the experience of playing a game. I wouldn't say made in the 80s or the 90s, but made with this mindset, made with this formula, and playing a game, an actual game, and why most of us don't like the multiplayer aspect of games. Just like TLDR of the whole conversation, but we basically, I personally always, I felt like when you play like an arcade game, like, it's basically like you mentioned, like, you blink, you die. You cannot you're not playing like to take. Of course, you can take a couple hits sometimes, but they are supposed to be hard. And for me, it always worked as I don't want to sound new age hippie here, but like it for me always playing games, like especially shmups, they felt pretty much like a meditation. You know, because you have to isolate yourself, isolate your mind from anything else that's happening around you. If you're not in a good day, you don't make any progress. If you're sleepy, or I don't know, if your mind is not in the right place when you're playing, like, you basically you're not very successul. And for me, they always worked as a way of learn how to concentrate. I have a very I probably have ADHD or something like that. I don't know.
I think we all have a little bit.
No, I probably have, but I can say that this taught me how to focus on things. You know, when on my daily life, sometimes I have to code, I have to do something that I have to pay a lot of attention. The first thing I think about is, okay, you're on a last boss on, I don't know, R-Type or Salamander or whatever. Like, pay attention to what you're doing. And I think for me it worked as a meditation, like, but it's a very introspective experience by doing this. And I believe that on the games that we see nowadays, it's the opposite. Like, people play to socialize. They don't play for the introspection, for the meditation, for the concentration. They play to socialize, and sometimes they don't. Of course, there are single-player games and like extremely hard games. I'm a big fan of Armored Core, for example. That just like the single-player games, you blink, you die. But I think it's that's one of the factors that turn them into a total different animal, you know, into a total different product. Like, you play for socializing, you play for, I wouldn't say compete, but to cooperate / compete with your teammates, because there's a lot of competition, even like in people that play together on the same team. But I think that's how it turns. That's how they end up becoming something completely different. Like, the experience itself is very different.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So a couple things that you're talking about. When I was thinking about how I wanted to try to talk to players when I finally got to releasing my first shmup in August of 2023, there are a few things that resonate strongly with me. So a lot of what you're describing is what I call flow state gaming, right? And flow state, and the thing is flow state is definitely documented, and there's this process in which you can get your brain into a place where you're just in a flow state, whatever the thing may be. And artists will talk about this, musicians will talk about this, where you stop completely actively thinking, and then your thoughts become part of the flow process, and it's all integrated. And the other thing that happens when you hit that flow state is it's digital meditation, right? Which it is in that case. And this thing that happened, I always call it like, with my son, I taught him very early on. It's like, you can have relationships when you have a conversation with one of your best friends on the planet, someone that you're really in tune with. Time just evaporates, right? Like it just rips. Like you blink and it's like you go out, you had a great time, you got in a great conversation, and what felt like 5 minutes turned out to be an hour, and you didn't even notice. And you're in this flow, right? And I think gaming from a single player perspective, it can also happen multiplayer as well, but it basically gives you the opportunity, just as you said, to trigger those states, but it comes only with practice. Like you can't be in the flow state and then pause the game and go get a sandwich and come back and then pick up immediately, right? Like you can't be looking at your text messages blinking and blooping all the time while you're trying to play this game and be focused, right? And streamers, lots of people stream these days, but they have very similar things where, like, especially when you watch speedrunners, great speedrunners, when they're playing Mega Man or whatever it may be, they know that, oh, hey, here's our room transition. And they know, because they're running for speed, that room transition is like 3 seconds. Perfect time to look down, see whatever the latest comment is, respond, yeah, be happy, excited, and back more focused, right? But that's this interesting cognitive juggle on top of it, but they're actively, because they're practicing against the machine and themselves, they're incorporating these aspects that are also, in a lot of ways, they're kind of bifurcated focus, if you will. And not everyone can do that. It's very hard. Playing a shmup and streaming and talking and doing all the thing is very, very difficult.
I've been trying to do this for years, and I'm failing miserably. So I can tell
you and me both. And the harder, it also depends on how much practice you have too, right? Like, the more you have your heavy memorization together, your timing, you're hitting your routes, like you're like, oh, hey, like I can envision what's happening from the machine perspective before I get there. That then means that you can dial that to the point where maybe you can insert some other cognitive abilities that you want to do, right? Like, but it's still, it's an outcome from doing that level of practice. Yeah, it's super interesting. I'd also point out that, ever since, Atari games, I went back through a couple of years back with a lot of my buds, and we did a retro gaming weekend, just one of the days of it, because we all get together, we're designers and developers in the industry, been working together in some cases since like 1999. And we played a lot of Atari games, and I was like, oh, I forgot, like a lot of Atari games didn't have endings. A lot of them were multiplayer, not all of them. But a lot of them had these social aspects. There was always this component of, if you had friends that were also into it, you could get together and have local couch co-op. And fighting games are a perfect example, right? Like when I did my sleepovers as a young dude, we didn't have online anything, so it was like 3 or 4 of us, and finally the parents go to bed, and we had to be quiet, of course. And you were always like, winner stays, loser pays type of thing. Not in the consoles, but same thing, putting a quarter in a machine, right? And you took some of those natural early social aspects. You had like Miss Pac-Man, you could play 2-player, right? Like they had things like that, right? So you had the competitive aspect, but also in arcades, you had this notion of sometimes you had co-op, sometimes you were just competing for that high score leaderboard position, right? Like, it was kind of a joy also to watch people like break that skill barrier, like you're hanging out and you're watching Donkey Kong, and someone's like literally going, like they're on the longest run you've ever seen, and you're watching things that you've never seen before, and it gets exciting, right? But it only comes from you as a gamer understanding how much skill it takes to get to that level of play, and that's what enhances that excitement. And I think a lot of times what we lose these days, and esports has tried really hard, and I've watched esports for a long time, and I'm a big RTS fan. I worked on RTS games in the past as well, Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, all kinds of stuff. And it's different when you are doing it online. It's not as personal, unfortunately. But I think also part of it is you're only as good as the audience either being able to visually understand or for the narrator to tell you what's going on. So like when you go to watch football, plenty of people, either soccer or football in the United States, they may not know the rules, but the there are enough people that know what's going on in the games where it's excited to participate. I'm not a huge sports fan, but then when you realize sports are kind of just a reason for people to get together and yell and shout and drink beer, you're like, oh, okay, I get this. I can understand what this is. And it's way better when you're doing it in an arena or a stadium full of people than when you're just on your couch doing it by yourself, so.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, you mentioned Salamander, and it's fun because kind of I wouldn't say it is definitely one of my all-time favorites also. Salamander is amazing, but I started playing the Salamander on the MSX, not on the Nintendo, not on the NES, because in Brazil we had the MSX. Like, it's kind of for us, like, the NES took a while to arrive over there. Like, it took it started arrive, like, we started having the clones in 1989. So yeah, it took us a lot of time, and but we had the MSXs, and we started playing the Salamander. When I played on the MSX, I found it, and I thought it was like, oh, this game is great. But when I played it on the NES, I was like, it was like a groundbreaking experience. Like, it was absolutely different, and it's fantastic. Not that the MSX version is bad, but it's totally different. Like, if you had a chance to take a look, Google for it, it's absolutely it's a different game. There is a lot of content, a lot of story about Brazil and the MSX scene and whatever, but it's not for today's episode. We can talk about that later. But like you mentioned, like, your experience with video games back in the day, mine was absolutely different. But we can maybe talk about that.
Absolutely.
By the way, if you're watching this and you want to know more about this, let us know. We can talk more about like how was in the ye old days of the gaming.
Ye olden days.
Yeah, ye olden days of gaming. We can talk about that because we have someone from the US and I'm from Brazil, and we can fill up the blanks.
Very easy.
Very easy.
Stay a while and listen.
Yeah, but my next question about game design is, as I'm a big fan of Salamander 2, and I totally understand why it caused such an impact on not just on you, but on many other players I know. It is considered, to be honest, one of the biggest hits in terms of game design that Konami ever did. I guess they were great on Gradius. Don't get me wrong, Gradius is fantastic. But Salamander, I don't know. There's something there. I don't know if it's the variety. I don't know if it's the fine tuning, or they just like enhance the formula by adding the vertical levels, or they went absolutely over the edge with the bosses, because the bosses on Gradius are every time you play a boss in Gradius is the same boss. Like, it's the same thing. It's that ship with the same pattern, the same everything. You just have to kill it, and that's it. In Salamander, they definitely improved the variety in terms of not just enemies, but they went very creative, I guess, with the tentacles swinging around and the organic levels and whatever. But what I feel like by playing Salamander, I remember I felt, and of course, like, feel free to disagree. Like, you're a big fan as well, so you probably have your own thoughts about this. I felt completely different, like, by playing a vertical and a horizontal level in Salamander. Like, it's to a point that sometimes I feel like if they could separate one thing from another, they will end up being two different games. I always had the impression that the vertical, the tate vertical format makes the game more dynamic, makes it faster, more dynamic, more I would say. I don't want to use the word reactive, but I think it calls more attention. I don't know if it's the format of the screen, because you cannot see much to the top as you can see to the right side. But in my opinion, my idea of a vertical game is like, it's more dynamic, it's faster, it's more aggressive, and the horizontal game benefits more, gives you the advantage of enabling you to more storytelling elements, because it's like you're for example, when you're running on a top-down level, to be honest, unless you make like unbreakable walls, like or killer walls that if you hit them you die, it doesn't matter too much what's on the ground, right? What's on the, like, there's probably an enemy here and there or something, like things that you have to chase, like in Dodonpachi, or I don't know, or I don't know, tanks coming from structures like flying sharks or something like that, or raiding, that you see that the little tanks coming from bunkers or tunnels or whatever. But it's more like a decorative feature than something that will change the gameplay very drastically. In the other hand, in the horizontal level, the floor matters a lot. Like what's going on the floor matters a lot, not just the floor but the ceiling. And I in my opinion, I feel like it's a better format to tell a story than the vertical, because like you have to build it a little bit more carefully, and you cannot make it scroll too fast, otherwise you'll lose completely the point. Like, for example, one game that I really like it, but I feel like they missed the opportunity is, oh my god, forgot the name now. It's on PC Engine on Mega Drive. It's let me Google for it.
Is it Thunder Force series or
no? It's just a minute.
Well, while you look that up, I'll answer your question a little bit too. So, yeah, so I think there's the mechanics of how you visually look at the screen, right? And for instance, in a vertical shmup, you can cover most of it with your peripheral vision. You can see more because the play space is constrained, as opposed to a horizontal shmup, where it's very hard to look at the far left and the far right side of the screen at the same time. And in shmup development, and something that's true in both cases, is that I call it the micro-macro vision, right? So when you get better at shmups, you're always trying to not look at your ship or your weak spot. You're always trying to look out. You're scanning the play field for the most dangerous elements, right? Whether those are environmental, bullets, or otherwise. And as things get more and more close to where you're going to take damage or die or collide with, it forces your vision to become more micro, unless you macro dodge, which means going, if you have a cloud of bullets, instead of going through them and dodging in between the bullets, you're going around them. So, and you're always trying to fight that layer of micro macro vision. And so, when I think about that from a horizontal shmup perspective, and I also affectionately call my game more like an adventure shmup. I've got some elements in there that are things I've never seen before, right? Like, for instance, in every one of my levels, I have a little secret sparkle. And if you fly over the secret sparkle, we bring up an area effect indicator, right? And then because it's scrolling most of the time, you actually have to maintain yourself inside this circle for 3 seconds as it counts down. And because it's scrolling, you actually have to be dexterous on the stick. And on top of that, enemies don't give a shit that you're trying to get a secret. They're going to shoot at you. So now you have to micro dodge, because if you get outside of the secret area effect, then you lose the secret before the countdown completes, right? And I would have never told you that I have a lot of fun, putting these little secrets there in every level, and we put it in the rank system, so at the end of the level, if you got it or not, and becomes this like exercise. And again, I love video games, right? Like in level 3, I've got a waterfall, and you know what's under the waterfall? It's a secret, right? Like I can't. It's as old as the red barrel, right? So, but I found like I had to make that area when he flew over the circle wider and wider, to the point where players could more successfully continue to navigate within it, because it's harder to hold your same space when when you're in an auto scroller, right? So it actually added like a level of skill there that I never quite expected, and it creates a lot of tense moments. But those aspects, and that aspect of like, where would the secret be? If it was in a vertical shmup, I could possibly do the same thing, but because you see the whole screen in the same way, and because you don't have to look as far, because you don't have as much real estate from a 16:9 in comparison to a 9:16, It's easier to hide things in the environment because, again, it's a little bit slower. You're telling a little bit more of a story because of the way you're filling out the space and the way you're populating it too, right? When you put geometry to fly through and things like that. It's a different set of mechanics. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wound up making a horizontal shmup. I played lots of verticals. And verticals are amazing, especially, I mean, Cave is prolific, does a fantastic job with their shmups, right? But last year, I sat down and I worked on my my 1 credit clear for Akai Katana Shin. Fantastic shmup, right? And I know for a lot of vertical shmup players, they will respect and appreciate that Cave did the horizontal shmup. But you can see there, because they had this kind of pseudo-military war theme, and it was kind of this big imagination, they were able to tell more of a cohesive environmental story in the way that they presented their formula to players. So, and they used an option and a bunch of other things that were also like from Gradu and other things that were great conventions. Man, when that game goes big, it goes amazing with like shooting your sword shards, and then we're traveling through and bullet canceling everything, destroying all these enemies, and things are just boinking everywhere. Man, chef's kiss, super cool. Did you find what you're looking for?
Yes, it's Aero Blasters or Air Busters.
Yep.
I quite like what they did. The game is very dynamic. I love it, but I don't know. Sometimes I think that the fast scrolling levels they added, like they queue you so easily that it's, I don't know, it's so I think it's a missed opportunity. Like they should like take advantage of that format and change things a little bit. Same thing happens to Gradius, but I don't know, they did well in Gradius. They didn't it didn't work because they didn't overuse it like they did in Aeroblasters, I guess. But I'm not saying the game is bad. The game is amazing, but like I just prefer not to have this part.
Yeah, well, those wind up becoming those high tension, sequences. I remember the first time I played through Bionic Commando and trying to escape, back in the NES, out of the like you're vertically going up and the facility's exploding, right? Like, and it's very intense, right? Like, and you're like, oh shit! But it's so hard to tune and balance that in a way that creates enough tension, so it's not just too easy. Because if it's too easy, there's no tension. But everyone's skill is at a different level. And at least by the end of the game, you've developed hopefully enough skills. And you as a designer, we as designers, you're always trying to say, okay, where is the player on their journey? Is it their first time they played through? How many levels have they beaten? Like, what skills have you taught them by, all games are rules, right? And they're dexterity-based rules. And part of our job as designers is to find ways to teach these mechanics without being heavy-handed. We can help it, right? And they'll let the gameplay help reinforce the mechanics. And then once you have these mechanics and the player's built some of this dexterity, maybe it's knowledge of enemies, maybe it's certain types of bullet patterns, then it's trying to layer this up to like get to that next level of challenge. But that's like the assumption stack on what you think the player can and can't do up to that point. And if you err on the side of just doing the same stuff that you've taught for the first X amount of levels in the game, everything gets boring and less fun. So you have to sort of one up that. And again, another very much school of Nintendo like trope, right? Nintendo's amazing at like, here's the new mechanic. And by the way, here's the new mechanic with no pressure. So you can figure it out. And we're going to make sure it's almost like a puzzle. So you have to use it to get out of the situation. And now here's the mechanic remixed with pressure. So now and like you're building up that lexicon of information inside the player's brain, right? And I think to your point earlier, when we talk about Life Force, one of the things that they did really well is, why would you want to use a laser over a ripple? How important is to have your options in this certain spot, including sticking them in the boss's face to like burn down the barriers that let you get to the core, right? And there's the surface of the level in which you design the game, and you're like, okay, people are, maybe they figure out some of these tricks, maybe they don't. But as they play, it's our responsibility as designers to leave these little nuggets for ultra efficiency. Like once you get someone to feel clever, that's why I always say, like, our job is to make people feel clever by discovering things, right? And once you're like, ooh, I can take my options, lock them, or pull them back behind the boss, and that's going to give me this frontal barrage. And by the way, getting close and point blanking, like, no one really taught these things, and that's somewhat of a problem sometimes. But when players play long enough, they start to figure out these efficiencies. Or back in the day, we would trade these tips. oh, you're having a hard time with the boss. This is what I wound up doing. This weapon in this case, like Einhander does a brilliant job with that. You find these secret weapons and bosses that once took you 3 minutes are getting destroyed in 30 seconds. That makes you feel like a god, right? Like you're like, wow, like, and then when someone watches, they're like, they don't even know what's going on, but they know that there's a skill gap for that, right? So
are you watching the long plays, the 1cc's that Konami is releasing for the Gradu's collection?
Oh, I am not.
That's a good topic for another day. Maybe for another episode here on this podcast is we should, I think, react to those videos because
that'd be awesome.
because I was watching and it was like, come on, no, nobody never tried to do that. Like they what they did is Konami got some super players. And they recorded a perfect run on each game. They did it for Gradius 1 and Salamander as well. They're probably going to do that for every game they're going to add to the collection. So probably Salamander 2, Gradius 2, Gradius 3, and that's it. But they're probably
that is awesome.
Yeah, they're going to. I think we should maybe for the next time we should just play the videos and react because what they do is. The level of craziness, what the super player do to beat the game in 1cc. That's a topic for another episode. And if you want to see that, if you are watching this and you want to see that, just let us know that we can arrange that. But
absolutely.
My other question is on the topic on designing, balancing difficulty and. How do you? That's a question that's probably question for many. Question that many other developers have because it's a problem not just for me but for every person I know that works with game design. How do you decide? Okay, this is fair. I want this added to my game. This is unfair. This is like I don't want this. And when you say this is unfair, but I want it. Mm-hmm. How do you have a method to how do you filter and say no, this is out, I want this out of my game, no, I want to keep this, is unfair, is mean, is evil, like people will shout, scream and hate me for this, but I want to keep this. How do you if I'm not even sure if you do that, but how do you decide when you do or when you don't do that?
So there's a few things that kind of go into the secret sauce, right? So one of the things is that I'm a firm believer that you as a developer, you have to be able, like you can push what you want from players beyond your skill gap, but if you can't get into that place where you can do the thing that you want done and you need someone else to do it for you, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice. You have to play your games. So the other thing that is really important to know, right, is that you as the developer will spend more time with your game than just about anyone else on the planet ever. Maybe you get a super player, but there's no substitute for just putting in design and development hours, right? Mm-hmm. And that means the way that you play and the level you play at and your understanding of all the systems, you are the most knowledgeable person that there probably ever will be. So what you are going to do, what you find fun, is already going to be a crazy, hard, ideally, skill gap for other players engaging with your game. Now, maybe that's not you as a player, but I would recommend if you're a developer of a shmup and you haven't 1cc'd anything, 1 credit cleared a game, right? You probably need to sit down. No, there's no probably. You need to sit down and you need to work on your 1 credit clear, because how can you design something for a super player, for someone to go on that journey, if you can't understand what it takes to walk that journey yourself, right? And when I said Akai Katana Shin, because the Interstellar 2 is taking a lot more flavor from Danmaku, right? And that's pretty huge. So that's why, it took me 40, 50 hours. If 40 or 50 hours to 1cc a game sounds like a gross waste of your time, you might want to rethink how you're spending your time as a designer, right? And luckily, I have a lot of baked-in experience from days yonder, but I also understand the cost to really deeply engage with. But that's like an RPG at that point, right? Like a sandbox RPG, whatever, right? So, but I meet a lot of developers. They don't see value in that. They're not that interested. And if you don't we were talking about this a little bit earlier, right? Like games as digital meditation, as triggering flow state. Gaming at some of its purest form is going to push you in terms of skills and dexterity. It's going to push you in terms of memorization, right? Like what you're trying to remember. It's going to push you because you always generally, especially in shmups, especially classic games, you always have a high score. And your high score, whether you play for score or not, is still an indicator of how well you improve each time, right? The longer you live, the more score you have until you hit a continue screen, you lose your score, right? So finally, when you beat the game, and with lives, like there's always like there's a sort of a one-up aspect to that. Where you're like, oh, my new high score is X or Y or Z, right? That's why it's a classic mechanic. So there's a couple things there. So the other thing, right, is, and it's hard in the indie scene these days because it's hard to have fans, and it's hard to find your fans. The shmup genre is very niche, and being able to playtest your game with people that are really deeply invested in it is very tough. Anyone that gives you any time playing the game, you should celebrate and treasure. Always have them record their video play, like record their playthroughs, put them up on YouTube. Anyone can do that these days very easily. And then you take the time to sit down and watch it, because there's no time, just like your virginity. There's no time like the first time, right? Like, and what you're going to learn from those first time user experiences is going to help make the mountain of how difficult the game is. It's going to help you like really put a better slope on that, right? You can always like, before Super Mario Maker, right? But in Super Mario Maker, there's a whole cult of like crazy, ultra precise, zany, insane platforming levels. And one of the things Nintendo does is like, if you can't beat your own level, you can't put it up there on the internet for other people, right? It's a really great rule, school Nintendo. And most of these levels and the fans that love them, those aren't things you would ship to anyone. Like you would never put these in a like, this is like Miyamoto when he was making Super Mario Brothers 2 and he's going through a divorce and he hated the player. Like the what you had to deal with in that, right? And they never made it to the States. It was brutal, right? So, and I think that's you. This is the data science. People don't understand. It's because you haven't designed it in a way for them to understand, for them to engage, right? So a good example is for an Interstellar Sentinel 1. First of all, I play tested on it as many people as I possibly could. Also, some of my streaming friends, back to streaming, right? Streaming and playing a shmup is like texting and driving. You can do it, but every time you look away from the road, there's an opportunity for an instant cow to show up and like fuck your day up, right? Or whatever it may be, right? So, and you could be very good at it, but there's always a chance. Like every time you read chat, there's a chance you're going to get destroyed, right?
I do a lot of streaming, shmup streaming mostly, and 90% of the time. And I don't know when to mention the name of this guy, but a guy entered the chat and say, "Oh my God, every time I see you playing, man, you're bad. Like you don't know your stuff. Like you don't beat the games and whatever." I say, dude, I'm playing and looking at the chat and answering like all kinds of questions here. And so can you understand how hard it is? But like, anyway, like,
and that's also part of the moral of the story, right? You'll never know what it's like for someone else in this situation unless you've spent a while walking in their boots, right? Like,
yeah.
How could you? Because we're all of that perspective, and when you make a game, like it's basically a dexterous interactive puzzle, right? It scratches so many itches at the same time, and your responsibility is to play test with as many people as they want to give you time. And then you also realize at some point that if you get someone that wants to come back and play and really get to the point where they can see everything the game has to offer at every level, we've had some players in the community that have spent 140 hours with the game, Interstellar 1, to finally see everything, because that's the other side of when we talk about dynamic difficulty and what that looks like, right? And the way I go about it, the game has 4 endings. They're all score based. The game has hidden mini bosses on every level except for level 1. And the only way you get to those hidden mini bosses is if you're screen clearing waves of enemies and achieving a high score and not dying. So there's this aspect that by the time I finished doing design for my game, that I've kind of built almost 3 games in one, right? So I build the flow layer where it's like, okay, like there's always something happening. There's no like crazy dead spaces. I never want you looking at the back or getting bored, right? There's always something spawning and attracting your attention because it's like a dance, right? And having players that can mostly see what that is, even if enemies are escaping off screen or they're dying a little bit from bullets or things like that. And then there's the next layer, right? Which I'm like, all right, cool. With extreme prejudice, kill everything you see. If enemies escape, that means I'm not good. That means you're not good enough to see the next layer. Like in the next layer is what I call it the monster trophy system, or in Schmups, it's similar to rank systems, right? But ranks are interesting because once players kind of understand them, they pull them apart and then are trying to measure, they're trying to meter their rankings so they don't go too crazy, right? Different topic, different experience. But then what I do is I layer in this dynamic difficulty system based on whether you're screen clearing multiple screens worth of enemies or not. And if you are, then I spawn a special enemy that is a little bit dangerous. You kill that and new waves are added. And then the whole thing kind of layers up from there. And only if you've done enough of those do I give you kind of a few advanced spawns, which are okay, I'm getting everything. I'm playing at my highest peak. And then at some point during each of the levels, I also turn, like if you collected all of those monster trophy medals, we call them, right? Then I spawn a hidden mini boss. It's like a little there it is, right? So it means that as players come back to play, the game skills up with them. They get better, the game gets a little better. They get better, the game gets a little better. And you're kind of leading them down the path. And then you're rewarding them with the new content, right? And even if they're reskins, if you put in a mini boss that is like the big version of this little enemy, there's something fun about that. Like the little enemy guy kind of gets his big moment to shine, right? Mm-hmm. And then probably bringing this back, right? The reason why I talked about the asshole Mario levels, right? Or the Super Mario Maker levels that are really crazy high skill gap. There's an audience for that. It's always easy to make a game really hard. You're going to spend several thousand hours making your thing. You can crank it up to 12, no problem. It is very hard to make a game that's easy enough to engage and lead people on that journey to that top level of excellence. And that's a whole art form. And sometimes you have to throw things away. Sometimes you have to redesign things. But one thing is true. At some point when I was doing Interstellar Sentinel, by the time I layered in all of that advanced difficulty, I was already relatively bored. I could play the game with my eyes closed. And so by the time I started creating content for myself to be a higher skill gap challenge, I recognized that was just wrecking lots of players. And so I needed to create a mechanism that was dynamic to lead them on that journey to get them to that higher skill level. And you can't do that without players. At some point, I have to actually stop touching my enemy designs and routes and patterns because I know every time I touch them, I'm just making it harder. And because it's more fun for me, but where I'm playing thousands of hours later is not where most people are going to be ever. There's super players and things like that, but it's sort of an art form, and so you have to data collection, play test with as many people as you can find. New players are only going to be new once. It's a finite pool of people, and that's where you're going to learn the most. That's why you have to record video, and then you sit down, and just like if you're putting in lab time for yourself, getting better at a shmup, and for the people that don't know what that means, basically, if you want to get really good at a game, record your gameplay, and play to the best of your ability. It can be any type of game. Speedrunners do this, and then you're going to watch yourself play the game, and then you're going to take notes, just like if you're playing a sport or you're trying to improve in anything, and you take notes on the things you want to correct, right? Because in the moment, what you see is different than when you step back and then see how you're performing in the moment, right? And so it's kind of like a large ball of understanding the layers of design, understanding where to meet players, data collection, and analyzing your own playthroughs. One of my own points of game development is that every time I upload a build to Steam, to the beta branch, I have played through that whole game. And a lot of it can be on autopilot, but I make it a point to stay engaged with the content, especially where I'm changing things. A lot of times developers are like, let's let the community take care of it. And as a professional game developer, from the industry side of things, I came up through QA. And one of the things that's really important, right, is that when you're making the sausage, you definitely are not that interested in eating the sausage. And you have to force yourself to continue to eat the sausage, because if you don't, you're going to make something that tastes like garbage. And so, and you're the only line of defense there. And if you're lucky, you have a paid QA team, and only if you're lucky enough to have a QA team that wants to go deeper. And so it's an interesting chunk of psychology, and it's very hard these days for indie gamers.
And I think this is interesting because, like, if you imagine, I already worked for video game companies, and to be honest, like, I never felt that the game I was working on was for me. Never. And it's quite a lot. Now that you mentioned it, I remember it was quite hard to commit to that level, and I feel like when developing a shmup, I'm doing something for myself as well. But back in the day, professionally, to be honest, I hated all the games I work on. Like it was like things that I would never play, like even for free. Like even if they give me the game, if they give me money to pay the game, I wouldn't play it because I didn't like it. And I imagine how many people nowadays that are, now I understand why there's a lot of people that nowadays that are doing shmups are shmup fans, because like if you're not, you're not working on a shmup.
You're also, it's not going to pay the bills to make shmups either. That's the other side of it too, right?
But that's why I think we have a very, I can say that because I've been following the scene since, I don't know, since I was born technically. But I believe that we have nowadays very high level and very high quality shmups being released, because probably one of the reasons is probably this, because the guy developing the shmup is also a shmup player.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I mean, look, even today, shmups are also considered gateway places to start your game development journey. So plenty of people, no offense, shit out to poor and terrible shmups. There will always be just shovelware or game jam versions or whatnot, right? So
which is fair. Yeah, just to be honest, like,
rite passage.
I love a lot of games that I know they're bad, and I don't care. I just love them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love. That's one of the things that why gaming is so fantastic. Like you are enabled to play and love and to have good memories and a good time with whatever you're playing. Doesn't matter if the game is good or not. Just have fun with it, and that's it. But they're
absolutely.
bad. But we know they're bad. That's a fact. We know that that game. But we know a bad game when you see one.
Guilty pleasures. It's like when you watch a B movie. You're like, it scratches my itch. I know it's not great, but and that's okay too, right? Like I mean, look, it's art. It's all art in that case, in that side of things. And there's something beautiful about it.
You're investing some time to have some fun. That's all you need. Like you don't need to be perfect. Like it's your time, it's your electricity, your hardware. You do whatever you want with it.
Yep, absolutely.
But I agree. But there's a lot of shovelware. Yes, definitely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting one too. Sometimes, I mean, look, we're all human. We're not fungible into anything if we don't want to be. And even if you want to be about something else, and I take it from a programming perspective, right? Like a lot of times you have your gameplay programmers, and it's a spectrum, right? Like I've met gameplay programmers that play a lot of games and they have what I call game sense, right? I don't have to tell them that that like, hey, when the character lands, we shouldn't put 2 seconds in for the character to play an animation to like stop and like have his legs compress and then he can run, right? Like sometimes with programmers, you actually have to tell them that if they don't have game sense, right? So sometimes you have programmers that they specialize. They're really into visuals. They're rendering programmers, right? Or they're systems programmers, and they aren't up at that level of gameplay programmers. They're different sets of inputs and skills, but they all affect, right? They all affect like the way the game comes together in the end, right? Like, it's you can't, like for my studio, right? I'm very fortunate right now with Uplifting Goat to have a team of 2 artists, right? My main lead artist and I have been working together for a decade almost. It's amazing. It's amazing to be able to that he trusts me with the imagination and where we're at and what we're building together. We're it's a labor of love for sure. I have one engineer, buddy of mine, who's on the Unreal Engine side. We're working on porting our game to Unreal Engine, and he does about 25 hours a week for me. And the thing is that with Schmups, we're never going to make enough money to pay for the whole studio to run itself. And we run it pretty lean, and so you're also competing with people's day job skills, right? Mm-hmm. Like engineers are still very well paid. There's other things, but it's not for this episode. And I basically, we do weekly meetings and I'm like, hey guys, hey friends, because guys and gals. And, we also have Ella Rock, our community manager too, right? So love her to death. She was part of the DrBossKey show. So we're a small little motley crew, right? And we show up every week, day in, day out, to spend time making this labor of love. And I remind them, I'm like, hey, I know when you're done with your work for the day, it's tough, but are we the type of team that are going to play our own games or not? Because if the answer is or not, I don't know if I want you on my team. And so when you're building game studios and talking about professionally and the kind of skill gap and the different trades in which people show up, because games aren't fun when you're working on them necessarily. They get to the point where you find some of that fun, and there you can be very it's like very, very Bob Ross. Sometimes you find a happy accident, something that worked, and that's why bullet hell genre was born to some degree, right? Where they're like, oh hey, we accidentally shrank the hitbox. And it turned out that that let a lot more room for close encounters and weaving through bullets, changed the game, right? And so they had the wherewithal to be like, oh wait, let's not just go back to sprites that have full chunky hitboxes. Let's actually incorporate this, right? So you also have to be guarded enough and passionate to see the things when they're coming, and that only happens if you show up. If you, that we run our little leaderboards in the Discord server, and I see that Chris, she's our latest intern artist. That's no longer an intern, so she works for us full time now. And I see her alternating between Caravan mode and Nine Hills Boss Rush, and then the single player campaign. And she's almost gotten through the single player campaign without getting to continue, right? Getting close to that 1cc on her casual difficulty. And every week I see her, the high scores, they get a little bit better. She puts in, I ask people to at least put in an hour, right? And that also connects them and us to this thing that we're making, because, and this is probably the last thing on this, right? So, part of my crew is the old Factor 5 guys, and we've worked on a lot of Star Wars games and Rogue Squadron 64, Rogue Squadron 64, Rogue Leaders, Rebel Strike. And one of the things I really appreciated about those guys is they were making games when I was dreaming about making games. So they've come up from the very early days, right? And they always took the time, the director, for instance, would play all the bills, as you want a director to do, right? So he never really lost focus, and that meant that he could push both on all the fronts that you do as a director: visuals, experience, controls, effects, etc., right? And then our engineers, they also they didn't have as much time. And generally, as a studio, we generally always try to arrange hey, Friday is take 2 hours, we're going to drink some beer and we're going to play the game. This is what we got to do. We got to play the build. So you want people to talk about it, right? And also, when people come from their different lenses, if you're a rendering programmer and you play through the latest level, you're like, oh, the light scattering model is kind of shitty here. Oh, wait, there's no dithering in the way we're setting up the clouds here. Oh, and so you kind of create this little laundry list of yourself, and there's no amount of directorship that or designer that's going to feed you all the tasks to get you to see it from your lens, and then to want to have the desire to improve the game. And so if everyone shows up to do that, that's when you get something that's actually extra magical, right? And the last little anecdote there, right, is the Rocksteady folks. So, and now Rocksteady is pretty much the way it is dead, right? So the founders are now, they're on to 99 stars, 99, whatever their thing is, right? So, but back in the day when they were doing the Batman games, Arkham Asylum and such, right? One of the reasons why the games were as amazing as they were is because they minimized distraction. They tried very hard not to create crunch culture. So a little story they told is they disconnected the internet from everyone's machines in the office, and they only had a few machines in which you could get up, go walk over and sit down and do research. I mean, anyone could do that, but you're not going to be hanging out there the whole time, all day, and you didn't have the same kind of distractions, right? And they said, hey, if we do this, we promise not to create crazy crunch culture. We don't want you to live your whole life here in the honor of making games. My 20s were monetized in that way. The company has monetized my passion for sure, right? And what they described is as they continue to work on the game, they just got deeper and deeper into the lore. They got deeper into the character of Batman. They got deeper into the design. They got they got to this. It's almost like hitting a flow state as a group showing up to work on things together, right? And they enabled each other with this sort of like, this these types of processes. So, and you only get to doing something magical like that.
Involuntary deep dive you need to do.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I see.
So, how's your project going, and some of your design challenges?
Well, basically, what we're doing now is we broke from the dependency on the art assets, so we're basically doing everything with geometric forms. Like we're basically building the game on squares, triangles, and circles.
It's like white boxing, right?
Yeah, and
or gray boxing, depending on got it.
Because what's happening now is we decided for a art style which is pixel art. It's our favorite. It's our stuff. We want to do something that would look like a PC Engine. Arcade PC Engine Mega Drive, I would say, SNES game,
8-bit, right?
Something like that, 16-bit. Ideally, we would want to do something that looks like the first shmups that you saw on the PSX, on the PlayStation. That you look and say, oh, this is good, this is better than the previous generation, but not 3D, not too over the
not going to the polygonal style, right?
No, and not too overly produced, no, it's like the basic but well done, the for example, light shading or shadows or reflections or the patterns or whatever. It's not too overboarding. It's just like the basic but well done. That's what I want to do. But because we created this, we decided for this pixel art style is something that takes a while to create, to get like good results. Like you definitely need to. You're definitely playing with a grid, an X, Y axis, Z grid of pixels that you have to carefully change and spread them across the screen. And if you change too much, like you end up messing up with everything. So you have to it's something you have to develop. Like it's you gotta love this kind of art to get into it. And I'm involved as well. It's me and Saulo and other contractors we have to do to work on that. But because we decided to do that, we noticed that the art production, the asset creation is a very slow process, especially in terms of animation. When you need to do the animation, like you cannot just like do like what I know a lot of people do on the 3D development. It's pretty easy. Like you have like predefined scripts to animate pretty much whatever you want, especially humans. Human bodies, so it's pretty it's much easier. But when you're creating 16-bit anime mech transformable with melee weapons and biological enemies and another mechs, and mechs are humanoid polygons, and you need to take care of lighting, and you need to take care of movement and animation and every frame of animation, the dynamism. It's quite hard, quite challenging. So the art production is quite slow. That's one of the reasons why we don't have anything to show at the moment. But we're taking our time to improve the gameplay aspects. Which
are you guys? What are you doing to your sprite authoring? Is it like AI sprite or what?
No, we are using a pretty simple tool, but this tool is quite good because it's the
like
only
Microsoft Paint?
tool. No, it's
I mean, I
forgot. No, yeah, but it's not too. It's not something fancy. It's a simple sprite tool. I forgot the name now, but the good thing is it mirrors the sprite.
What did I say? AI or AE sprite?
Yeah, I think that's one. But I think that's
AAS sprite. That's it is.
Yeah. because that's the only one that mirrors the sprite when you're designing. So you're basically drawing and it mirrors the pixels because there's a lot of symmetrical enemies.
I dropped a link to that to the bottom. Yeah, this V13 looks pretty good. A lot of folks in our community are using AS Sprite.
Yeah, and the resolution itself, the game resolution itself is pretty low, and we're also using a square screen. It's a 1x1 playfield because we're going to work with vertical, horizontal, and multi scroll. So we didn't want to. We decided not to take to benefit from a wide or tall screen. We decided to make it symmetrical, like square.
Yeah, so very very Death Smiles-esque. So
and
multi-scrolling there.
Also, we intend to add a generous amount of panels on the free space. So
are you going to do blue revolver style gadgets and things like that? That kind of
All right. We want to do. We want to add a lot of stuff on but we want to use something. This is something we're designing as well. We want to add a nice HUD over there with meaningful information, like things that they're going to use in the game, not just numbers saying that. I don't know, you shot your 1,000, did you shot 9999990? No, we don't need that. That's the next boss. Oh, okay, great. Now, thanks for letting me know, 10 seconds ahead. So, we don't need that. You don't need to show wherever you are on the screen, on the stage. That makes no sense. So we're trying to add gameplay elements that react somehow. For example, let's say you are making an example based on your game on Interstellar Sentinel. You just moved on top of a secret item. There's a radar item. There's a radar on the HUD that will show something blimping on the radar. You see, that's the kind of thing we want to. Or for example, the cooldowns. You see, for every weapon there will be a cooldown gauge there to show you when you can use it again. We just don't want to spam a lot of information there. We want to make it, and this kind of refinement is quite complicated. So, but to do that, we want to first have a good gameplay. And that's what we're working now. So we're redesigning shot sizes, shot speed, the area of coverage for every weapon, how every weapon evolves. So we basically took a step back because we're depending on the art assets to get ready. And we said, okay, how can we use this in our advantage? So we're basically polishing the gameplay and trying to make, and there will be more than one character. So every character will be different. We don't want to just reskin a character and change the color and the shape and whatever, but it's the same in the end. So they're going to be significantly different from one to another, and there will be 5 of them. So, and the game is not going to be too long, to be honest. It's going to be a quite arcade-ish game. It's going to be 30 minutes long tops on the arcade mode, because there is the story mode. The story mode is another story, another product that's going to be released later. When we finish,
are you going to repurpose the side panels to help communicate some of the story elements, or what are you thinking?
Okay. Yes. There will be the story mode is another. There will be some things that are not necessary on the arcade mode that we're going to remove, and we're going to add, for example, communications. That Metal Gear-ish radio thingy bar that you see the two faces talking. Yeah, there will be something over there that will be reserved just for communications, just in case someone wants to. Some people don't care, they don't like reading the text, or they don't care about the interaction with the other characters. But then the story mode is going to be important. And the story mode, there will be more. Of course, it's gonna be a shmup still, but it's gonna be something more like in the lines of what's the name of that? Today I'm terrible for names today, but it's Guardian Legend.
Okay. Oh man, Guardian Legend was great. Another one of those games that broke my brain. What a gem! It was a borrowed game from a friend. I was like, well, whatever. And I got home and it took me so deep.
Yeah, that's what we're aiming to create. Something more in the story mode will be more multi-directional, more exploration, more lore, a lot more lore, and more. You know that aspect you mentioned, Bionic Commando. When you're playing Bionic Commando and you had a map and you could go anywhere in the map, and sometimes you just bumped into something that was not supposed to be there, like the enemy helicopters or the trucks. Then you had to do something to get rid of the trucks because you got blocked. There will be a space system, and you're going to travel between planets. And when traveling between planets, things will happen. So the story mode is going to be a long run. It's going to be like, and when you beat the story mode, you will enable the Super Arcade, which is the extended arcade mode. You will see things that you only saw on the story mode, but implemented on the arcade mode. Is the Arcade EX.
That sounds cool. Yeah, so you'll be working on this for years to come.
Yeah, I don't care.
It's a beautiful thing about hobbies. There's nothing wrong with that.
There's a lot of things that you just have to reuse. Like there will be a lot of asset reusing on this, and repurposing, reusing, retooling. But
I mean, Interstellar 1 with me scripting everything. I mean, it was 18 months to go from 0 to a release, and that wasn't our final release by any measure. It was a little rough, but that was about 54-minute playthrough, so about Gradius 5 length, 8 stages, and I was like, wow, it probably amounted to a couple thousand hours, maybe 3-ish, 2,000-ish hours and not just counting in the editor, so but of my time to get there, it was crazy when you put so much human effort in. It's like when you look at like a 2-hour feature length movie, right? And you look at all the credits and all the people who do effects, and like it takes an army, hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of dollars for what amounts to 2 hours of like human entertainment, right? So yeah, it's kind of crazy because people can, play my game in an hour and be like, that's enough for me. Great. That's fine. There's more if they want it. But yeah, it's kind of crazy to condense tens of thousands of hours of human effort down into essentially an hour-long experience. So that's what I mean. So,
but talking about Interstellar Sentinel 1 and possibly about 2 as well. I know that you mentioned 57 weapons. Is that it?
Yeah, it's about, maybe it might be 53, 57. I've lost count.
Okay,
but yes,
53. That's that.
It's high 50s.
Yeah, I was playing. When I was playing, I noticed that it's quite rare to get the same weapon like twice in a row. Like it's quite a variety of weapons. And one of the things I like most about the weapons is how crazy they are. Like some of them are totally like non-conventional, like and quite surprisingly useful once you get the grip of it. And are you going to do the same for Interstellar Sentinel 2, or you're doing something more self-contained, or you're going full crazy?
So there's still probably a world where I either go on to Interstellar 3, or I go back to Interstellar 1, and then I want to add more weapons. So like weapons and power-ups were something that I was like, oh, this really always excited me. And I always love that moment in which you turn on a weapon and you're like, what's this thing do? And then, Einhander also did a great job with this. Like you pick up like the mosquito, or you pick up the telewire rocket, or you pick up the laser sword, and you're like, ooh, like it makes your brain go, ooh, ooh, ooh. And then if you use it in the right situations, on the right conditions, as you master the weapon, you get more out of it, right? So, but to answer your question,
no, because the first thing I noticed was I was playing your game and I was seeing this guy made every crazy weapon he could think about.
I left a few on the cutting room floor for sure.
Put in this game, like every crazy idea he had, he turned into a weapon and included in the game.
We got like the flux capacitor ring weapon. The people really love. We have this what I call the octoplasma tentacle weapon. So you turn this thing on and it's a short range weapon, but each one of the tentacles are these flexible lasers. And they have a tendency, they all have auto homing. So as you get close to something, all of them like glom on and start doing damage. So to the enemies. So it really empowers like that short range weapon gameplay versus the long range. So in Interstellar 2, because I got this weapon system done in Interstellar 1, I really enjoy it. I also want to try to do something a little bit different this time around. So in Interstellar 2, it's a more focused Dan Maku-inspired weapon system. So I think we turned a real corner in this. So I was playtesting this at Shmup Slam 7, by the way, which I did just last weekend. We did a live playthrough, and it was a huge bucket list dream to bring my Steam Deck, set it up in it's called the Akibara arcade, and it's in Westminster in Colorado, and met the manager and Mark over at the Electric Underground, and like it was really cool. You haven't lived until you've got 40 nerds together that are watching someone do a DOJ or a DDP like playthrough, working on their 1cc and pull it off for the first time. People were cheering. There was lots of copious drinking. We had a big stage with big monitors, right? There was live commentary. It was remote. It was also in person, right? So anyways, I digress. So for Interstellar 2, what I'm doing is you have your rapid shot. So in Interstellar 1, just so people know this, so you have a rapid shot, which is aligned with your vulnerability spot. And then you have a fixed weapon point underneath. You summon your guns, and that's your power shot. And your power shot does about 10 times more damage than your rapid shot. So the rule of thumb or the gameplay is if it's chonky, use your power shot because you're going to burn it down 10 times more quickly. But the thing is every power shot, there are a few times where we break the rules, but every power shot has about 0.8 seconds of charge up time. So it's not just immediate. The rapid shot is always immediate. And that's kind of like for killing your popcorners and for, like making sure like you can switch back and forth. And then so because you have a charge up for your shot and then you have a looping meter for reshooting, it means that it takes a higher skill level to use those. So the flow of the game is then switching back and forth between rapid and power shot. And then you have your auto weapon for utility. And then every weapon set always has some kind of backwards utility. I know it's a lot for players to like learn for sure. But again, for me, I thought that was kind of one of the things I had never really experienced in the shmup. So that's why I created the system. So with that in mind, what we've done for Interstellar 2 is that you have your rapid shot. It's aligned to your vulnerability spot, as you'd expect. It behaves, and it's basically just a spread shot. And it starts out with 3 beams. And we've taken a little inspiration from Crimson Clover. So every 30 seconds that you're alive, we might need to turn the dial a little bit. It then will upgrade. And you still have weapon sets. So you have a rapid shot. You have a power shot. It's not a fixed point in the same way. And I'll explain that in a second. And then you also have essentially an auto weapon. And then we have this new thing that we've added to this system called the overpower shot. And I'll explain all this in a second. So in Interstellar 2, the power shot, instead of being a fixed weapon point of gameplay, because what I found from playtesting is that, one, Einhander, while I love it, it's still a very niche shmup that a lot of people don't know. And the vast majority of shmup players never really played Einhander. So when you take and this is a nice little design tip out there for other people. So when you take and what I mean by this is that if you imagine with me, where you have, like, if you're talking about a spaceship, you have the cockpit, and the cockpit's where you take damage. And generally, the logical thing is that your shots usually coming from the front of the ship. And so as you're shooting down screen, either it's vertical or horizontal, you always are using basically your bullets that you're seeing, rapid shots, because they always trace back to where your vulnerability spot is. So when you start to get comfortable, you're never looking at your player very much. You're always looking at your shots because you're trying to align what you're hitting. And by that extension, you also know where your vulnerability spot is because it's basically an extension of you shooting, right? So I know that was a lot. So in Interstellar 1, when we put the gun summoning portal at the bottom, and it has a different point of fixed space, that power shot doesn't align with their vulnerability spot. So then what happens is people see this big, massive gun that kind of looks like a spaceship, and it draws their eye away from their vulnerability spot. And so it creates a lot of, like, especially for shmup players that have played a lot of shmups, it creates a dichotomy where they're shooting from one point in the screen, but it doesn't align now with their vulnerability spot, and it makes it extra hard. And got a lot of feedback, play tested, moved these things around 10 ways to Sunday. And I built in Interstellar 1, because of Einhander influences, I really wanted to have this fixed point shot gameplay. So the first versions I had, the rapid shot was above. It was also a spaceship back then. And then the power shot was below, and the vulnerability spot was in the middle. And so it means that also the origin points for the weapons allow you to take the weapons and shove them into enemies. And because your vulnerability spot is behind the weapons, you have advanced techniques with point blanking to do damage there. But it turns out that it's hard for a lot of players to really grok that system, and it's against the grain of what they're used to. So now that I've unpacked that for you, you kind of understand that. In Interstellar 2, we've taken the concept, the power shot now is what I call an astral projection melee attack. So it's copies of yourself and you're a character, and they are now in line with your rapid shot and your power shot. So it's very Dan Maku in that when you go from a spread shot, hence the rapid shot, down to a focus beam, basically while it's eye candy for the melee attacks, and they get longer in the screen, it's basically also kind of like a power beam. So very Akai Katana Shin inspired, right? And so that brings in, we slow down with a focus shot, we sped up the base low player speed, rapid shots. So as you have the Crimson Clover every 30 seconds, you'll upgrade if you stayed alive. If you die, you downgrade one weapon set. The weapon set is still your rapid, your power shot, and then your auto weapon, plus your overpower shot. And so now it's starting to feel really good in that respect. If you're living, you start to upgrade. Your spread gets spreadier. Your focus shot, the astral projection gets longer and further. So, and you're using that, and then your auto shots, you get more of them at that point. So we have this like laser stasis field that we're playing with. So as you fire your rapid or your power shot, it leaves these little stasis trails behind it that do damage when players run into it. And then the new secret sauce this time around, hence more Dan Maku flavor, is that, and this is really starting to feel really good. So we have this concept called the overpower shot. And what it is that if you're holding down the button for rapid shot or focus shot, after 1.25 seconds progresses, it's kind of a charge up. If you let off the button, or if you switch to your other shot, because you do that in Dan Maku, you're fly fast, focus shot, micro through the bullets, or do more damage. And so then from your auto shot perspective, if you're using the rapid shot, you throw these giant swords. These giant swords do extra damage, and they have pierce on them, so they can pierce through multiple enemies. And that starts to feel really good, but that puts you in this new rhythm where you're like, rapid shot, rapid shot, rapid shot. Ooh, now my overshot is ready. Either let off for a second, tap again, or hit down for that focus shot. And then on the flip side of that, if you're using your focus shot, the astral projection beam, you same thing, 1.25 seconds, kind of keeping that similar like rhythm and cadence. And then if you let off the focus shot or switch buttons, then you shoot off these auto tracking missiles. So they're a little less strong because the focus shot is really strong in that respect, but they help clear up a bunch of the extra enemies and things like that. So that so far is, I think, the core of the weapon system. I think it brings something unique that I haven't quite seen, that I haven't played through a bunch of Dan Maku's myself as well. And I think seems so far like a lot of the super players that I played with in the arcade that gave it a try. A lot of them were enjoying that. Some of them weren't quite sure about the laser stasis field, but that is sort of homogenized down into this particular weapon system. Interstellar 3, we'll see what we wind up doing. So I didn't want to just take everything that was Interstellar 1 and then make new graphics and new bosses and things like that. And I'm starting to go back to and revisiting every element that I built in Interstellar 1 as an adventure shmup, and to reconsider, do I want to bring this to Interstellar 2? What's the value? How does this change things up? So, so that's it on the kind of weapon system and how it's evolved over time.
Cool. And
with that, I'm a nerd.
But yeah, now that you mentioned Schmups Slam, how was it? What were the impressions about the event?
So I first attended Shmup Slam. So this is 7 now. So 5, 6, 7. So 5. I got really, really busy with the business of diving deeper into the shmup hole, if you will, right? Like, and look, we are so lucky, and I'm so grateful and humbled that in this sphere of players that love shmups, that there's still people like us out there. Shmup Junkies is one of the premier destinations on the entire planet for collecting people together that are still discovering shmups. There are players that are still discovering shmups, and then they come in, and instead of a community that's like, fuck you, noob, go away, like, this is hardcore real games, get your Vampire Survivors out of here, like, most of the time, the old men shaking their fists are still quite welcoming for players embarking on their new journey, right? And so if you can imagine, again, I mean, there was like maybe 40 of us in IRL and at the Akihabara arcade, and so many devs, people like you, like so many, like a lot of super players were there. This is an expression of people trying to do 1cc clears of like, DOJ. On screen we saw Futari, right? Like, a good range of shmups. It was very, very hardcore. I dropped a link for you. It was a 2-day event. Started at 8 a.m. And then was done at like 2 a.m. So it was, and we did our run on day 1, and we were the first game to do it in the streaming it from inside the arcade. So our community manager, Ella Rock, good shout out to her. She totally got so nervous, and she melted down, and we practiced this in the previous week leading up to it, and she's like, she said to me, she was like, I thought that people were going to know that I am, that I don't know as much about shmups as they do, and that people would be very upset about that. And she said that while she was there in the waiting to do commentary with the other commentators, that one of the commentators said, hey, most people don't even know what this game is, Interstellar Sentinel. and by the way, Rochelle Ellerock, she's played the game 200 hours. She's working on her 1cc. She's got her 1cc's on all the difficulty modes. Like, and she comes from a place where she's a mom of 3, and when she was 8 years old, that's when she first found it was Don Pachi, not even Do Don Pachi at that point. It was Don Pachi, and she tells the story of she was an 8-year-old little girl, and her mom and dad in the Philippines and the family would go to this bowling alley, and they would bowl, and that was their thing they did weekly. And being a little girl, you can only watch the rock roll down the lane so many times before you're bored, right? And she described that there was a small arcade, right, in the bowling alley. And of course, back then, by the way, the cacophony of an arcade. I worked in an arcade for 2 years at a Namco arcade, and I wanted the job so badly. It took me a year to get the job because I was too enthusiastic, right? And when you have all the arcade games, and coming from arcade culture to some degree too, right? Like, all the games have their attract modes. They're all making their noises. They make different noises when people are playing the game, and it kind of just becomes this huge celebration, a cacophony of just noise, right? Sometimes 50 or 100 games, depending on the size of the arcade, and even more in some cases. And it was really cool to come back to see that it's all very niche culture at this point. So coming back to the arcade and sampling that again was great. So yeah, so Rochelle, basically, she's like, that's when she first discovered Don Pachi. She was a mod for us for a long time for the DrBossKey show. And now for the last 5 or 6 months, she's been reconnecting and starting kind of that journey of understanding shmups. She's working on her Dodonpachi playthrough right now, right? She's putting it all online, which is great. And so coming back to her, like, doing the commentatorship. So, like, the commentator is like, no one knows what's going on. You are the authority. Whatever you say goes. Doesn't matter in this case. And if someone says otherwise, then that's okay too. It's not a big deal. Like, don't sweat it that much. So she had an incredible journey. She had to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to do it because she was doing it remotely here. And I think that probably is the other side of this, right? Is that going to the arcade, because we've been doing this now. I also run this subreddit called r shmup dev, and I'm an old dude. And one of the things I do is I work in the engine we use right now is called Shmup Creator. The developer is a really nice guy. He's been working on the engine since like 2011. And I do it for my own preservation. So like I've done like 105 tips and tricks videos for using this tool set, because as I have built the game, you're like, oh, how do you do dynamic movement for a boss? How do you do boss intros? How do you switch music? And I do it just as much for me as I do it for the community, because I'm like, at some point I've forgotten how to re-script it. So I just go back and I look at my own videos, right? And so showing up in real life and seeing like the super players being there, seeing the passion. No one is flying to the middle of America to have a bad time at this event, right? And to see people like in randoms coming into the arcade and seeing what we're all excited about, right? We had about 12 or 15 arcade cabinets. So the owner, Brandon, he was really sweet. Changed out a bunch of the arcade cabs, had lots of candy cabs, right? And changed them out to some other shmups. He's got tons and tons of arcades, right? Arcade boards. Just this amazing like cacophony. It was a nice bar arcade, right? It was a nice cross section of counterculture, because a lot of people don't know what this is anymore, right? And it's really receded into the back. So we had some people there that were really into like kind of their cosplay and their animates. And he was really cool. He had all these a lot of like, he had his Dance Dance Revolution there, and he also had a lot of like good samplings of other rhythm games. And by the way, rhythm games are amazing. When I went to Japan and I did Tokyo and Kyoto about 6 or 7 years ago, it was also really interesting to see that rhythm games, especially advanced rhythm games, are once they get their hooks in you, people love them. They love them to death, you know. And I so it was really cool to come back to all that. And he's a very great operator in that he has one wall, and it's a wall of about 10 monitors, and people can just bring their game consoles. So it's not like one of those things. And so people would bring their own game consoles. I brought my Steam Deck, and I just set up the game. We had 3 people from the Shmup creator community, some people that I've been serving and helping and supporting their game projects, playtesting their games, helping them with my tutorial videos. And you bump into these guys, you meet them for the first time, and you're like, wow, we're having beers together. And it was just... It was like mecha nerddom. I mean, it was definitely a bucket list item, right? And then to see super players come over and play with Interstellar Sentinel, I don't get a lot of super players, right? And to see them engage with it for the first time and see that they had a hunger to want to continue playing, because it's a long playthrough. And then also I got to sit there and do commentary for them, because we're all there anyways. I know my game like the back of my head. I've commentated over the years for all of my streaming friends, because it's a neat little novelty. It's very rare that you can have the game director in your ear talking about what you're doing, right? Yeah. And it's something electric about that, right? And the best part is super players, even though they got their 1cc's on like normal and heroic, not a huge deal, right? Because the game is designed to be more welcoming for new players. They weren't seeing all the content. So it left them hungry to realize that, okay, they got hit a little bit, they died a little bit, but to see that there was more, and that was worth its weight in gold for just the game development, the community, my own shmup development process. It was a hell of a whirlwind. And by the way, it's a cacophony of noise. So when you're trying to talk to people, you're basically yelling, right? Yeah. Like being in a nightclub. So it was 2 days of yelling and commentating in people's ears. And by the end of that, I sounded like the actor who voices or was voicing Solid Snake, right? Like he used to describe like he prepared for his parties. Like I go out the night before and I drink and I'd smoke and I'd get my throat really gravelly, and that would become Snake's voice. I was like, yeah, that's how I felt after that. So it was amazing. I dropped a link for you as well. It was really, really cool. I would love to rally and bring more people. I talked to Mark. We're gonna do. I think we're gonna do that at the Akibar Arcade for Shmup Slam 8 next year about this time. It was just last weekend, and it was really, it was like Mark was the living dead, because it's like I don't know 20, 30 something shmups, right? Like and you have to like break down gear and set it up and get it all streaming. It was awesome on so many levels. So I'm really looking forward to next year.
Yeah, that's cool. It's good to see that we're having more and more events. I know they did another one here in Spain. Mm-hmm. I forgot the name of the event they did here in Spain. They did a couple, I think, a month ago.
Was that the one that Hauser was part of? Or
no, in Spain? No, they did it. There's a Mikado something arcade in Spain. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I forgot the name of the event, but they did this. We're going to do the next one in September in Brazil as well. So it's nice to see that there's going to be I see. I mean, it's nice because like it feels like I think the scene was never better. Like we're getting into a point where like this kind of events are becoming like kind of a constant thing in your calendar. So
it's
No, just saying that I'm pretty happy that I never thought I was gonna see or participate or something like that, and I'm quite happy that this is possible nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely, right. It's also will of the people. I mean, one of the things I can say about this, I mean, first of all, people don't run an arcade as a business anymore. I mean, yes, it is a business establishment, right? But you're not going to get so many coin-op arcade. Like you only make so much money on quarters. No one's making new arcades for the most part. Arcade games for the arcade. And it takes time and effort to repair all the cabinets and keep them maintained and all that as well. So one of the things I really like is, again, it's almost coming back to counterculture, right? So it's a place where the interest is in the nostalgia and the novelty of interacting with the machines, right? And the people, like it's culture, it's cross culture, right? Like it doesn't matter like who you are, where you're from, if you're just interested, even just having a good time watching games, and you're just walking down these rows of arcade cabinets, and you had all the good stuff where like you had in Japan, you had the with fighting games in particular, you have where the cabinets are back to back, and so you fight each other, but you have your own one. So you're not sitting side to side necessarily. So it's really cool to see this place where people could come and just be excited about being around something that doesn't really exist in that way anymore. We still have in the States like Dave and Buster's and a few things where we're like these like big eateries and they're a little bit bigger. And there is some of that, but it's definitely shrank compared to where it was at its heyday. So, and I love that we're still connecting. We're finding ways to connect and having a good time, and at the end of the day, it's people drinking and playing games and hopefully seeing people, play at different skill levels and pushing our own abilities to cheer each other on and just have a good time. Oh, which reminds me. So I hear one of the things you're super passionate about, me too, but is doing caravans and like bringing that back, right? For the people maybe that don't know what that is, do you want to explain what caravans are?
Well, basically a caravan mode in a game. Some games are just a caravan mode, but basically it's a mode that was included to some games in the mid 80s zone, I would say.
Hudson Soft pioneered a lot of this.
Yes, which basically consists on scoring as much as you can in a pre-established time limit. But the problem is, it's not just a matter of shooting everything that comes to the screen. It's how you do it. Depending on what there are tasks to do on the screen on a certain amount of time, and how the faster you accomplish the tasks, the faster new tasks are added to the screen, and which of course like increases the amount of increases the score that you can hit on that section. So basically, let's say you're playing and there you see 3 enemies enter the screen. If you immediately kill the 3 enemies, another enemy enters the screen. In this but the difference is you may take 1 second to kill those 3 enemies, or you may take 5 seconds to kill these 3 enemies. But if you make it in 1 second, the next enemy enters, and if you kill that enemy in 1 or 2 seconds or as fast as you can, you may end up accomplishing all the tasks you have to do in a 3 minutes limit or 5 minutes limit, and you end up maximizing your score to the maximum, to the highest. If you only this small difference, if it takes you 2-3 seconds more you end up like not fighting like 1 or 2 or 3 enemies, which causes a huge impact in your score in the end. So the caravan is not just how fast, but and also there's some enemies that don't depend on time. Some enemies is the method, like it's how you kill them. For example, I remember on Soldier Blade, there's an enemy that forms a ring around you, and you have to be in the middle of the ring, and you have to kill that enemy from within the ring. If you don't do that, of course you kill them, but different things happens. And some enemies are not supposed to be killed. Some enemies are not supposed to be killed in a certain order. So there are many quirks. So it's a game you're going to play and replay. It's a mode that requires lots of revisiting and re-examining the way you play it and checking and comparing your score to the others. The idea of the caravan mode is to create a 3-minute perfect gameplay on that time, and to be in this mode to be used in competitions, like where you could put like lots of people to play together, and once they play together, they compare the routing, the methods, how they play it, how they do it, and see who has the more effective method on the on that run, basically.
Yeah. From what I hear, legend has it, like back in the Hudson's off times, and we're talking about probably the early 90s, maybe late 80s, early 90s. And back then, what they did, because Schmups were still relatively new, and so they would basically do a roadshow where they took their games that they were developing, and then they would go to these different cities and towns, and then they would put on the caravan competition. And they described it back then because it was also raising awareness for like games as an art form, as a way to have fun, right? And they described that it was one of the first times as well where children and parents could compete. So fathers and sons is kind of what they talked about back then. And that generally sons, they had more disposable time, so they generally were better at the games than their fathers. But their fathers liked to also play if they were kind of like a bit more early modern in that respect. And so it gave them kind of an even playing field where it was more skill based. It wasn't physically based, right? It didn't matter how tall you were, didn't matter how much muscle mass you had, right? And so they would run these things. That also was the case where that was some very early play testing where they would watch players play, and because they were incentivized to get the highest scores possible, they would see their super players would start to emerge because you put a prize pool out, right? And so then the developers, it kind of created what I call the arms race, right? So the players got better because they were competing, and then now the developers had to make more challenging content. So then the players got better because they had more challenging content, and so this just went on and on and on over the years. And that's also one of the reasons why I think Schmups kind of left behind a lot of average players, a lot of casual players. They became just the default became harder and harder, and that's a hard thing to deal with. So, but I think that's also one of the reasons why Schmups have kind of fallen to where they're at now in terms of history. I mean, there's other reasons for that too, but that's another episode. So
yeah, well, there's so much to talk. I guess like we raised. I think we just raised like 3 or 4 new episodes here by talking, but
yeah, absolutely.
We are almost 2 hours in a row talking about Schmups here, and I think people are probably. They deserve that. I think they deserve it. They deserve that we take some time to prepare the new content for the other episodes. So I think we should maybe quit for now, especially because it's getting late here in UK. But anyway, I think that was a good one. We had a good time. We covered lots of topics here. It was a good introduction to this podcast. And if you are curious about DrBossKey's content, check out his channel. He's keeping a very nice developing blog. That's such a old word. Blog. But anyway, he's keeping a very good developing log channel on his channel. So check out his content. Also, he has you post on the same content, right? The tips for the dev tips, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm too lazy to have multiple YouTube channels, so
I can tell you it's a lot of work, but
absolutely.
But yeah, if you're developing and you need some tips, take a look at his channel as well. And well, thanks again for making some time to participate on this conversation today, and thank you so much for watching. And we'll soon announce another chapter, and we're still going to figure out what we're going to check. I vouch for the React, because I think it's going to be fun.
That would be fun.
Konami already released the Gradius 1 and Salamander Super Play, and I definitely lost my shit when I watched both of them. So I definitely,
so good. I'm gonna check this out.
I definitely think we should watch together, react, and do our comments, because it's super interesting. The way they beat the games is absolutely the opposite what I would do. And,
yeah, that sounds awesome.
So maybe we have a strong candidate. If you don't agree, we left lots of suggestions here all across this video to so you could comment, leave in the comments, and we'll think about it. Maybe we'll do whatever you suggested or not. But anyway,
yeah, feel free. Leave questions, comments down in the below. We're it's the first episode, right? So I like we're a little bit of wisdom. We're just kind of all over the map and talking about things we love. And thank you so much, Zorky, for creating the space for us.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, guys. See you in the next episode. Peace out and bye.